CircuitPython Day, we code and play the open source way. CircuitPython Day, we code and play the open source way. We code and play.
Code. Play. Code. Play. Code.
All right, hello everybody. Welcome to CircuitPython Day. Yay!
There we go. Yeah.
Oh, Dan's got his shirt on.
Okay.
I have a different shirt that's not CircuitPython,
Okay.
but it's very Seattle. So hello everybody, my name is Scott. I work on CircuitPython for Adafruit. If you don't know what CircuitPython is, it's a version of Python, which is a programming language designed to make things really easy to program, to make electronics really easy to program. For example, I have a fun house here. So here's one board that Adafruit's created with a screen on the front. And then under this little thing is the microcontroller. It's a little tiny computer. So CircuitPython, you plug in, it shows up as a drive, and you can edit code there. So this is just a coffee chat with Dan and I. We are kind of the core, some of the core C developers that develop the CircuitPython kind of firmware that goes on the device. Generally, we're working under the hood, so to speak. My background is in computer engineering, and I started working for Adafruit almost 8 years ago, which is insane. So it's like 8 years ago Sunday that I started working on MicroPython for Adafruit, and that quickly evolved into CircuitPython. So we're happy to take questions and just chit chat for the next little bit. I don't know how long we'll go. But if you have questions, feel free to ask them. We'll take them. Otherwise, we'll just chat about stuff. And Dan, why don't you introduce yourself?
Okay, sure. So I'm Dan, and I also am a core developer. And I started working for Adafruit for pay just about 7 years ago, almost exactly. But before that, I had been like a contributor to CircuitPython for maybe 10 months or so before that, because I've been using it for an assistive technology project. And I said, oh, this is great, but I need some bugs fixed. And I ended up fixing the bugs and it turned into a job.
Yeah.
So that's what happened.
Yeah, and my origin story is actually through Show and Tell. So Adafruit hosts a Show and Tell every Wednesday. And I had been showing my drone stuff that I had done in my gap year, kind of after leaving Google. And I discovered that I really liked working on embedded, but I was starting to look for a job. So you can still find this old Show and Tell where I'm like, I'm looking for a job, and Phil asks like, what do you do? And I'm like, oh, I'm a software engineer. And like the next day, I got an email saying like, hey, do you want to work on this project? Like, and I was like, yeah, sure, I'm game for a project. And they're like, this is MicroPython, and I had not heard of MicroPython at the time, but I'd been a long-time user of Python and just also discovered how awesome embedded electronics are. So it was like, it's been the perfect thing for me, and I've been so lucky to be able to create CircuitPython that we have like a day for now and stuff. I do remember we should plug that we do have a coupon code, so you can go to adafruit.com and do CPD16 for 16% off in the shop. So support Adafruit, who pays Dan and I and a number of other folks to do not only the CircuitPython core, but the like broader CircuitPython ecosystem. That's the libraries, Blinka, and the core, kind of all that is CircuitPython ecosystem that is supported by Adafruit.
And I would also say, like, didn't have much background or any embedded programming, but I had done a lot of software stuff before. But I had a background in electronics also, like just as a hobby, and so it was a really good fit for me too. And then I found out that embedded programming wasn't actually so mysterious.
Yeah, you learn the tricks, right?
Yeah, it's just coding.
Yeah, I mean, I really liked it. Like, I was coming from this cloud world where there's this like system upon system upon system, and like being so close to the actual like CPU and the hardware itself is just, I find it much more fun. So I just want to say a quick hello to the folks in the chat. So 3D Tech Guy, Toddbot, John Park, C. Grover, DCD, Mark, and Squid JPEG. And then Mark's got a question that we could start off with. And then Some Nice just did another question. So Mark says, here's a question to get things started. Is it possible / will you be getting CircuitPython to run on the new RP2350 RISC-V cores and not just the M33? Hello, MicroDave as well. So I guess I'll answer this because I've been doing most of the RP2350 work. If you follow Deep Dives, so I stream normally on Fridays at 2 p.m. Pacific. A few months ago, I went down into the build system weeds because I really don't like our build system, but it's also consistently ugly across all of our different chip families. And I went in those weeds partly because I actually wanted to make it easier to build CircuitPython for the RISC-V core that is in the RP2350. Turns out our build system is really complicated, so I was never able to do that. And frankly, I know that the M33 is going to be more performant, largely because it has a floating point math accelerator to it, whereas the RISC-V core does not. So it's possible, totally possible, right? Like all the peripheral stuff's going to be the same. It's only the CPU that'll be different. But I think what you'll find is, what I would expect is that it's not as performant. If you're curious about that, I think the MicroPython folks, because they maintain both a make system and a CMake system, I think they actually do have builds of MicroPython that are for the RISC-V core. So if somebody wanted to do that comparison between MicroPython on the RISC-V core and on the M33 core, I'd love to see it, just so that I stop, like if it is actually performant, that I stop saying that.
I guess we don't even know. We don't know why they put in 2 cores, but you can speculate. You can speculate about the business reasons for doing that. So,
yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think a lot of cores. Something that ARM brings to the game is that the core has been taped out, right? It's actually been made into silicon. And the RISC-V core here is called the Hazard 3, and it's developed by somebody who works for Raspberry Pi. So I was not surprised at all to see that in there. And then there's also a theory that it's like doesn't actually add that much cost for them because the area of the chip itself is not usually taken up by the CPU cores. It's the RAM and all the peripherals and stuff. I think RAM is a large bit of it, and then the bus matrix too. Okay, so the next question we have here from Some Nice, maybe I'm saying that wrong, is what is the milestone for 10? What will be added and what will be dropped? Do you want to take that, Dan?
So we do have some like transitions about things that's going to be dropped, and maybe I should even look up what they are, so I don't do this off the top of my head.
Except I think the main one we've been talking about is not, and we don't have an issue for. So we do have we have an issue list. If you go to github.com/adafruit/circuitpython/issues, you can see all of the things that we are tracking. And they have the ability to mark milestones, and there's a 10.0 milestone there. So we're an open source project, which means you can go see everything that Dan and I are working on, and Jeff and some of the other folks as well. And the issues will show kind of like what we're targeting for CircuitPython 10.
So I put a link into those milestones
in the Discord, which I should say for the YouTubers, if you want to join the Discord and you're not, the URL is adafru.it/discord, and that will jump you to our Discord link. Discord is chat that lasts kind of all week long. It's not just during a stream. So it's a great place to coordinate with folks and get help with CircuitPython.
All right. And so there are some things, there's some sort of deprecated stuff that we were in 9, both of the ways of doing something exist, and then we drop the deprecated version in the next version. And we've been doing that consistently as we advance version. So we try not to make an incompatible change at a major version boundary, but just do it so that your code will continue to run and you have a chance to change your code to the new version using, and yet still be able to run your old code. That's
Right.
not always true, but mostly true. So the stuff that's in there is not so interesting, but what would you say? What is the thing that we've left out, Scott, that you said that's not in the?
The thing that we've been talking about a lot is redoing the partition tables for Espressif
Oh, yes.
4 megabyte flash boards. So we tend to do the major version boundary bumps because those are the ones that we expect to take involvement from the person doing the upgrade to upgrade their code or do something along with that. And so that's the point where we'll say like, hey, we're going to reorganize the way that the code is stored in the flash for the 4 megabyte Espressif chips, so that right now we have 2 smaller partitions that CircuitPython can fit in, so that you can, when you do an over-the-air update, you can switch between them. But in practice, we never do that. So what we want to do instead is have one larger section so that we can fit more things. And that's the sort of thing I think we're planning on doing with 10, and that'll allow us to do things like turn on Bluetooth Low Energy on more of those boards. So that's definitely something we're looking at for 10. We're not sure what the timing for 10 will be. The other forcing function that we tend to do major versions on is when we update MicroPython, and those updates include new MPY formats. MPY is a binary format that MicroPython uses to load code faster. And sometimes on their releases, they'll change that format. So that was the driving factor for CircuitPython 9. Was that we were doing a MicroPython update and getting a new MPY version. But for the updates that Dan is doing right now, that is not happening. The MPY version is staying the same.
Right. Just as background, I'm currently merging MicroPython version 122 into CircuitPython, and then I'm going to do 123, and there will probably be a 124 pretty soon. They're actively working on that, and they have more scheduled releases nowadays than they used to. They're even working on MicroPython 2, and there's a bunch of support in there, latent support in there for preview versions of 2, but that doesn't really pertain to us. And I would say that what we import, what we merge from MicroPython is mostly the core language interpreter. So that is the same across all the ports on all the boards, but the ports themselves to the different chips are different for MicroPython and CircuitPython. So for instance, both MicroPython and CircuitPython support the Nordic NRF chips, but the port part is completely different. And it's functionally, it can support the same thing like I2C and SPI and stuff, but the API that we present in MicroPython or CircuitPython is different. Right. So that part is pretty different, and we don't merge in their changes to that, except to see like, oh, did they fix something interesting maybe?
Right.
One other thing that I would say that we've been thinking about, it might not be in 10, and is a really long-term thing, which is that right now we don't have, if you want to control, for instance, the drive strength on a pin or whether it has a pull-up or a pull-down, specifying those things is done in each thing that uses a pin. So digital in-out or I2C or keypad or something like that, like whether you use a pull and so forth, that's all specified there. And we're thinking about how we might factor that out into a separate object that you could specify, you could set, and then you would pass that as an object in. Right now, the pins that you pass in are read-only. They're just basically names of pins. And perhaps pins should have more state. So we might think about doing that kind of in an experimental way, maybe for 10 or maybe for later.
Right.
We don't know, but people are asking for that, and it would make it more flexible.
Yeah, typically what we do, we tend to have 2 major versions that we support at any one time. And so when we're evolving APIs, we'll have one release with the old API and a new release that has the new API and the old API. And then once you drop the one that only has the old one, then you'll just have the new one. So you'll like both major versions that we support will always have a same API, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Whether it's the old one or the new one, it varies. But okay, Larry just had a quick question about, is CircuitPython available for the Arduino Giga? I linked them in the chat to circuitpython.org/downloads. This is the landing page for getting CircuitPython for your board. And then we do have Blinka as well, and I think there's a separate Blinka page of boards that are supported there. If it's MicroPython only or a Linux single board computer, then Blinka is the way to use CircuitPython libraries on that. Okay, we've got some other questions that we should get to. Question for each of you: what's the coolest feature, user-facing or behind the scenes, that's happened to CircuitPython? This is from ToddBot. I think, do you know what you would say, Dan?
Well, I would actually say it's really old, and it's what attracted me to CircuitPython was very early USB HID support was enabled so many things for people and made it a really useful. I mean, that's why I wanted to use it before I even started working for CircuitPython. So that's really old.
So let me de-acronym you. HID stands for Human Interface Device. And this is the USB protocol for acting like a mouse, a keyboard, a gamepad, those sorts of things. That's why you can use CircuitPython to make a device that looks like one of those things to your regular computer.
I mean, I think since then, both, obviously Bluetooth and Wi-Fi have been really important and have been major things that enable all kinds of stuff for people.
Right. Yeah. And I tend to think a lot about what I think of as the workflow, which is like, how do people actually edit the CircuitPython code? And the Bluetooth and Wi-Fi, we've done a lot of work to make it possible to edit code and see your serial output, your print output over Wi-Fi and Bluetooth as well, which I think is still one of those things that's like in the long term really going to work out. It takes a lot of effort. USB is like so universal that it's hard to compete with.
So another question, C. Grover asks, are there plans to upscale the Pi Badge and Pi Gamer board form factor with improved processors and displays? CircuitPython performance improvements for gaming would be impressive.
This is a better question for Limor, I think.
Yeah.
Because Limor Lady Ada does the actual board design. We're on the software side of things. And I will tell you from a software perspective, the new RP2350 has this peripheral called the HSTX, high-speed transmit peripheral that can do DVI. And it's 640 by 480. So I'm very excited about what we could do with that support for it. It's in that vein, but it's not like a native display. It would work with your TV, which I think would be cool too.
But I think in general, we see that a lot of boards are often updated to use new processors, like the Matrix Portal went from an M4 to an S3.
Right.
So, though the old one's still available.
Yeah, and Fede2 points out, I would love OTA to remain. So I think the plan is that OTA will remain on the larger Flash variants. It's only the 4 megabyte ones where we're going to change our policy and say no OTA on 4 megabyte ones. We want the regular 2 megabyte partition for CircuitPython instead. Let's see. Sorry, I'm just getting caught up. Squid says, I got to say my favorite feature is how easy it is to play high quality audio in CircuitPython. And then I think there's a couple questions from YouTube are next. So 3D Tech Guy says, anyone know about the BBC Microbit? Yes, you can run MicroPython on the original Microbit, but the CircuitPython will work on the Microbit v2, and work that Melissa has done. So if folks don't know, there's code.circuitpython.org. This is an editor. You probably want to use it in Chrome. Because Chrome has more features that it can use, but you can edit CircuitPython code straight from the browser. from code.circuitpython.org. And it will make it easier for the microbit v2, which does not have native USB broken out. So not the original microbit, but the microbit v2 you can run CircuitPython on, and I'd use code.circuitpython.org to do that.
So John Hind asks, is there any way CircuitPython could be built as an Arduino app so it could be built by ordinary mortals, or some way of doing Arduino extensions for CircuitPython? So we'd say, well, no, it's never going to be an Arduino app. It's just too big and it requires too close talking to the processor. But it doesn't mean, I mean, right now we have this guide about how to build CircuitPython, and there's a lot of setup and so forth. Some people have started doing things like building Docker containers that contain everything you need, so you don't need to do a lot of setup. And we might try to support that or have somebody else support it so that it's easier for you to just download a Docker container, maybe even for a particular version of CircuitPython, and just then just run, make this and that to fix things up. As for Arduino extensions, also the same thing applies, that Arduino assumes certain things about how you use the hardware, and we don't make those same assumptions.
Right.
But whether you can add C extensions to CircuitPython, you can do that. Right now, it's a lot of trouble, and you have to know a lot of API stuff.
And the guide is out of date.
Right?
The guide is out of date. Like Dave did a guide for it right before we changed our build system or something.
And it's hard to keep up to date.
Yeah. The best resource if you want to dig into the internals of CircuitPython, I would say, is the Discord channel, the CircuitPython-dev. That's where Dan and I are regularly chat and are during the US work week. So if you're doing internal core stuff, that's the place. If you're not doing core stuff but using CircuitPython, on Discord there's also a help with CircuitPython channel that is for the I'm just using it and I want to get help for that.
So let's see.
Brent is next, I think.
Or Tyeth. Tyeth has a question about the lib folder.
Oh yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, has there been any previous desire or attempt to get the lib folder to overload frozen modules? It causes a bit of friction currently as each guide expects lib to work. So the answer to that is that if you want to override frozen, given what is in sys.path, so I'll explain. Sys.path is something that's built into Python, all versions of Python, and it says, where do you look for things when you import them? And so in CircuitPython, it's the top level drive, that is the top level of CircuitPy, and then frozen, and then lib. Okay? And so that means that frozen overrides what's in lib. But if you want to add a new version of a library, like to try out or to override, just put it at the top level.
Right, so you can modify the path before you do the import.
Yeah.
Or
you can modify the path, or you can actually just store the library in the top level instead of storing it in lib. The libraries don't have to be in lib. That's just a convention.
Right. It just has to be in somewhere that is listed in path.
Yeah.
And the top level is listed there too. Oh, best feature in the last year? Is what Toddbot was asking?
The last year.
Oh, that's a separate question.
Okay.
I mean, I'm excited about the 2350, but and I can't remember what I was doing before that.
I'd have to look at the release notes.
We got CircuitPython 9 out the door before that. I think there was a lot of did a lot of that.
Yeah.
A large volume difference. I have my mic high. I think if I turn my mic up, I'm going to end up clipping, but I can boost my mic a little bit.
Who's louder?
It says you're louder, I think.
I can turn my mic down.
Is what Mark says. You sound fine to me. Okay, so Brent has a question. Scott mentioned workflow. Are there any new workflow changes coming with 10 that you're looking forward to? I don't think we have any workflow changes planned. I think the latest change is just that Melissa's been doing a ton of work on the code.circuitpython.org editor. particularly so it can do the like send files over serial stuff, which is like there's a few cases where that's what we need to use it wired. And so that's, I think the most exciting workflow stuff happening right now is actually on the website side that Melissa's been doing. Yanni says like RISC-V has now some MicroPython support, for example, too. Yeah, so we have RISC-V support. The ESP32C series is all RISC-V cores. They're not open cores as far as I know, but those are, yeah, we do have some. 3D TechTie asks about 3D printer filament colors. We're the wrong people to ask. I mean, I guess if you look at the stuff around us, it would be blue, purple, and pink. But Noe and Pedro, who do 3D printing, those are the folks to really like ask 3D printing questions too. Dave says the volumes seem the same to me. Okay, so we should.
I turned mine down about 10%, but it's not 10 dB.
So I think the next question for us is Microdev says, how are AI tools working with the core CP codebase? Has the workflow become more productive? Do you want to give your impression first, Dan?
I don't use AI tools at all, and Scott does.
You tried it, though.
I tried it. I tried like autocomplete, and I just found that it was interfering with my train of thought. So, and I was also trying it in Emacs, which it's not the easiest to set it up.
Right.
And I think I would like to try, like I was thinking of trying in some place where it's more easily already set up, like VS Code, and just to see whether I could ask it to prompt it and say, do this, okay? Like, please generate this boilerplate, as opposed to guess what boilerplate.
You don't actually need to do that in the editor, though, either. You could just do it in like the ChatGPT interface.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Right.
And I actually recommended, yesterday was the first time I actually recommended somebody look at it. What they were doing is they were converting an Arduino library to CircuitPython. And I said, and I kind of went into it assuming they had done this. And they were like, actually, I did all the conversion by hand. And I'm like, and then they were like, but it would be great if there was a tool that did this. And I said, like, you should actually look at the LLMs, large language models. They're actually quite good for converting. Here's a program that's in C to Python, right? Like it can do that translation pretty well. I use Sublime Text for editing, and I have GitHub Copilot set up, and I like it a lot. I use it as a much smarter autocomplete. It's great for print statements. I do a lot of printf debugging, so like it doesn't really matter exactly like what the debug statement says. So it can just like fill in some sort of like all I do is start the print statement, and then it just fills in printing something at that place. And like usually it's like I find myself saying like that'll work. All right, it's like not exactly what I would have typed, but it'll work just fine. And sometimes they'll even like include variables that I wasn't planning on including because I'm lazy. So I found that was really helpful. And then the other place that's been really helpful is I was doing Circuit Matter, so re-implementing the Matter IoT spec in Python. I was doing a lot of like enumerations of like, when I'm parsing a packet, I have to read this ID and there's 20 different like values that could mean something. And so I was just copying and pasting out of the spec into the document, not proper Python at all. But then so that's to give the language model context. And then I start typing like the Python code that I want to like enumerate all those different options. And then it's smart about knowing like what the next thing is going to be. Like, so like the names and the values, like it does that really well too. Including like the comments and stuff too, you can have it do. It kind of follows your model of what you're doing and then uses the thing you pasted in as reference. And then once you're done, you just delete the stuff that it was referencing. So yeah, I'm definitely sold on large language models as a helpful assistant sort of thing.
Would you recommend one in particular? Like, have you been using only ChatGPT, or have you tried any of the other?
I'm pretty much only using GitHub Copilot. Okay. Because we're an open source project, you get access to it for free. For closed source stuff, you do have to pay a subscription. And I'm not sure how that interfaces with folks that are doing stuff, but I've I've been using that and it's been great, to the point where like if it's not set up on my laptop, I set it up because I miss it. Or if it didn't start up, then it would be helpful.
I guess I would also make, like, Lemore, Lady Ada has been using ChatGPT to generate drivers in Arduino for some time now. Like, and of course she's an expert and she can tell when it's doing it wrong, but she feeds it like the data sheet of a sensor and has a bunch of prompts to get it to point it in the right direction. And she finds that it does a lot of the boilerplate for her.
Right. So what I was encouraging this person in the issue yesterday was like, it's going to do a lot of the grunt work for you, but you still have to go over it and like make decisions and make sure it made the right decisions for you. Because it's also good at making stuff up that may not be valid.
So Brent had asked at, I guess, your 9:19 p.m., 9:19 a.m., are there any new workflow changes coming with 10 that you're looking forward to?
Yeah, I think I answered that in microdevs after that as well.
Oh, okay, sure.
I think we're on David's question here from
Okay,
920.
Yeah.
When facing a non-Adafruit hardware, is there a way to distinguish an Adafruit provided port, a community provided port, and a vendor provided port? How can we push vendors to do a PR for the hardware like all the new RP2350 hardware? Good question.
Yeah.
I definitely, like, there's two boats, right? One boat is Adafruit's going to release hardware with it, and therefore Dan and I can spend our time on it. That's where the RP2350 lives. And we're building on top of their SDK, and that makes it pretty easy. But then there's also a couple cases like Scilabs has some chips with CircuitPython support that they did. And kind of Dan and I play more the role of like, we're here if you need us, we're happy to help, here's how to get started. And kind of like also making promises about like, hey, if you do this work, we're actually going to get it merged in and kind of make sure that it still compiles and kind of works in the long term.
And Sony's Presence is the other example of that.
Sony's Presence is another example. And we do try to clarify the stability of the ports in the release notes, whether we think that it's a fully stable port or whether it's still considered alpha and may have bugs. But we don't designate kind of who's on the hook for that.
We'll do a port to a particular board. Certainly, if it's an Adafruit board, but also if we resell the board or it's some development board that we've used as an initial setup. So, for instance, we have done the ports to boards for the Espressa dev boards, for instance, because they're often the first boards that are available,
right?
And they're very complete and so forth.
Yeah.
And they also provide kind of like a generic implementation.
Yeah, a lot of the work to support a new chip is like something that shares across boards. So it's just like, it's nice to just, like, I like doing the ESP dev kits because I just know that like we support all of their chips via that. Tyeth points out you can use dev containers on GitHub to work on the CircuitPython core. I know folks have added that. Mark points out that there are native code modules, although they're not always turned on. Some Nice says frozen modules were something I learned about very late. I'm not sure they're mentioned too much in Learn Guides. Yeah, frozen modules are really just an optimization for loading and file size.
We sort of did it out of necessity on some of the very small boards we were supporting in the beginning.
Yeah.
But generally, it's convenient if you have like something that you want it to work right out of the box. But because the modules are frozen, it makes it difficult to update and it's confusing. So we kind of don't recommend it unless you want to have a particular kind of experience or unless you have to use it for the space.
Right. Mikhail Pakusa says, are you maybe planning on adding support for translations for libraries? If yes, how would that work? Would the translation be part of UF2 files? I think this is because I mentioned I'd love that to work, but I have no idea how it would work.
I was thinking about that, and I mean, get text is the way that it's done in Python, and you could imagine that a library, the messages in a library are strings that are supplied by get text. We'd have to really like cut the get text way down so it's very small, and then what we'd probably do is, I would maybe we would either, I would say maybe we would have multiple bundles, and each bundle had a language files for a particular library. Like the the French language files.
Right.
Like it would be the French bundle, and it would have all the libraries, but would have only the language files for French, so that you wouldn't have to do anything by hand to get that to work. You just copy over the whole library.
Right. Yeah, cool. Yeah, I'd love to do that. Next up, Pivot to Python says, do you know if CircuitPython is being used in production in any consumer products? How does the licensing work?
It's used in TI calculators.
That's right. I forgot about that.
Yeah, a very small version is used in a certain TI calculator. It's the SAMD21 CircuitPython port.
Yeah. I suspect there are more like small batch things that people use it for. But because Dan and I don't do kind of commercial contracting, we just contract for Adafruit. We don't actually have like customers that we know of that are doing it. Once in a while, somebody will pop up on the support forums and be like, I have 200 of these and they're not working, or one of them has this problem. We try to help, but generally we're not support contracting work for commercial products. So licensing wise, CircuitPython is all MIT. If you want to use the trademark CircuitPython, we ask that you actually use a stock version from the repo, but you're welcome to call it something else or not tell anybody that you're using it, and just use the code under the MIT license. And then in terms of getting support, like we have limited bandwidth, like not zero, but not like all day to help people if they have questions. And specifically, if it's a problem that you can demonstrate on Adafruit hardware, it's more interesting in a higher priority FOS as well.
Okay, there's one question from YouTube chat. Does CircuitPython support the Zhao ESP32S3 Sense with its camera feature? Somebody is just trying to work on that right now and having some build trouble, and I'm helping them to debug it. But it should just work, and we don't intend to work on it ourselves, but like there's actually an issue open right now about this. You could check that and see how that's going. And there's a thread in the Help with CircuitPython chat right at the moment, and I'm working with that person on that.
So some links to get to the Discord: adafru.it/discord. You'll see the Help with CircuitPython chat on the left-hand side, and then there's also a way to see the threads for that channel. And then if you want to follow the issues, that's github.com/adafruit/CircuitPython. Mikhail Pakusa also asks, among all CircuitPython supported boards, what is your favorite and why?
I don't think I have a favorite, but I have multiple favorites. I like the MacroPad a lot. I think that's a really cute board and very well engineered from a mechanical point of view.
I have a favorite chipset for sure, and it's the ESP32S3. It's like very capable, and it's very capable and can do BLE and Wi-Fi as well. If I'm debugging it, I really like the Espressif dev kits because they break out the UART line with a separate converter. But generally, like ESP32S3s are one of my favorites, just because they're well connected. And 3D Tech Guy, please don't keep asking the same question over and over. This is not the right stream for it. You'll want to catch Noe and Pedro if you want to ask 3D printer questions.
Quinman asks, is there Uno Rev 4 support with CircuitPython? No, the Uno still doesn't have enough memory and flash to be able to run CircuitPython.
Is that That's the new Renaissance
Yeah,
chip, I think.
yeah. Well, maybe there could be like a very small, like sort of trinket-sized port, but it doesn't have external flash.
Yeah, I don't remember what its specs are.
Yeah, I think it's
It's
sort of
certainly closer than the previous
it's
one.
like a SAMD21 in
Okay.
capability.
Yeah.
So there's not, and we don't have a port to other Renesas chips, so it would be a really big job for kind of a very small payoff. There are far
Right.
more capable boards that are available in the same form
Right.
factor.
Right. Yeah, like our Metro has the same, like Adafruit Metros are the same pinout as Uno's. DIY Electro Music says, what is the status of the Raspberry Pi bare metal version? Did you ever get it out of alpha, and are there any plans to support the Raspberry Pi 5? No, we didn't get it out of alpha, and we don't plan on doing Pi 5. One of the main reasons I was interested in that port is because it had HDMI support, because I really wanted to do this sort of like retro computer all-in-one CircuitPython computer and have it work with modern televisions. But the answer is that, or the reality is that the RP2350 can do that. Not at full HDMI resolution, but can work with your TV over an HDMI cable. And it can do USB host at the same time. So it doesn't really make sense to put a lot more time into the Raspberry Pi port. That's for the single board computer side. That's what I would say.
Yeah, we don't plan to work on it any further right now, I guess you would say.
Yeah, I don't have. It's not top of my list. Like Circuit Matter is the thing I really would like to get back to.
Yeah. Let's see. Larry Cherner in a YouTube chat. Is there a more full-featured editor than Mu that will interface with CircuitPython? There are a variety of editors that you can use. There's a list of editors that work well with CircuitPython because they write files completely when they write files, like so VS Code and PyCharm are examples of other editors, and some of them have plugins or extensions that support CircuitPython, so that you can get rid of the little squiggly lines underneath things.
Right.
And so basically, really any editor will work.
Right.
So
yeah, it was something we wanted to do from the very get-go, is that unlike Arduino, we're not really tied to an editor. Most CircuitPython boards will show up as a USB drive with a code.py file on it, and any sort of text editor that can edit a text file will work. The device itself, when you save the file, or when the file system, or when the operating system saves the file, will auto restart your code. So it's common for my setup to actually just have Sublime Text and a separate terminal connection in a separate window. I don't need those two things in the same app. So it should be really flexible for you to basically use the editor that you prefer. You don't have to use a separate editor for CircuitPython necessarily.
I would also say that we're working right now. Melissa, and she'll talk about this in a stream later, that she's working on a web-based editor that doesn't require loading anything. It's obviously not an editor with many features, but it works talking to boards that present CircuitPy drive, and also now we're making it work on boards that don't, such as the C3 right. and the C6 and the old ESP32. Right. So it does sort of like what Thani does. And there's also an editor called Viper that's web-based that's also similar to that. So we may start recommending one of those editors over Mu right now, because Mu is not working on all the platforms that we'd like it to work on right now. And so it's harder to recommend it as a getting started editor. So we'll see about that in the next few months, about whether we might kind of switch to one of the web-based editors.
Right. I'm going to say Poyo says, what's the status on Bluetooth for CircuitPython? I bought a Pico W and found threads discussing the software for integrating Bluetooth is still in production. Bluetooth works well in CircuitPython, but not on the Pico W. Is what I would say. If you want to use CircuitPython and Bluetooth, I would recommend an NRF52840 or an ESP32S3. They're both much easier for us to support because they don't have an external coprocessor that is required. The Pico W, like the thing that's doing the Wi-Fi and the Bluetooth, is actually the separate chip. And that's just a lot more of a burden. And then the other thing is that the side of Bluetooth that runs within the CircuitPython core, the stack that they use is called BT stack, and that would be a third type of software for us to support for Bluetooth in CircuitPython, and that's just it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work to support yet another stack, and if you want to know, you can ask the MicroPython team because they support a number as well. So it's not high on our list. If you want Bluetooth in CircuitPython, we have other boards that can do that, which is another reason to just like, sorry. Okay.
So MiltyLV2 asked, can RP2350 do full HDMI with additional PS RAM?
So the answer is no, if you mean 1080p. And it's not just a RAM constraint. It's actually not, in my book, it's not how much RAM you have, it's how fast everything can go. So the way that DVI works, in my understanding, is that to get more pixels across, you have to run faster. And so the actual limitation for resolution on the 2350 is how fast you can output bits, not like how many bits you're storing. So there's a chance we might be able to do like 800 by 480. I heard that some folks were doing that. But basically to get up to 1080p, you would have to have just like a much higher clock rate in order to get the bits out. And then external PS RAM also has bandwidth problems because it's only 4 bits and it can only run so fast from there as well. So I think 640 by 40 is quite good. And I'd rather see what we can do with that than worry about going up to 1080p. And if you really want that, then that's where the Broadcom chips are like very clearly good, because like if somebody polished up CircuitPython on bare metal Broadcom chips, which are on the Raspberry Pis, like you could get 2 4K outputs, right? Like they're designed for those high resolution outputs. So no, 640 by 480, maybe a little bit bigger, maybe with some overclocking, but you're not really going to get up to 1080p.
And do you have any, I don't know, I did had the same question myself. John Hind asks in Discord, how about the 2350 supporting TTL RGB 666 displays?
I imagine it's something that you can do with PIO.
But their protocol is not the same, is not the write-only protocol. That's the XST, whatever is new in the RP2350. That doesn't support, that's not going to support
HSTX, yeah.
Could it be used for that?
Maybe. I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah, that's
what there's plenty of PIO.
Yeah.
To do it as well. But probably, you could probably support those as well. And are we caught up? Yeah, I think we're caught up. Yeah. Simple workflow and ease of prototyping. Stereo sound effects device. Yeah. I think that's about it. Do you have any closing thoughts here, Dan?
I just say one of the things that I love about working on CircuitPython or doing this work is that I'm so close to the users, just as we are doing now. Okay, yeah. And it's not just in forums like this. It's that I hear directly from people when they're having a problem or when they have something they want to give us a compliment on. That's nice too. It's one of the most the instant gratification of working on CircuitPython is
Right.
constantly reinforced, I guess I would say.
Yeah, I totally agree. Especially like where I was at Google for 6 years, and it's just like couldn't um, couldn't tell really about anything that I'd done, even though like it impacted everybody that used Google Maps. Right? It's just like to talk about my little niche would involve talking about a whole lot of other stuff. And now I can do deep dive and just talk about what I've been working on in CircuitPython land, which is, yeah, wonderful world of open source software and being paid to work on it. So I guess with that, I'll plug that I'm deep diving at 2 p.m. Pacific right here on Adafruit YouTube. It'll be a bit shorter. They're normally 2 hours, but we're going to do just an hour because Tim will also be deep diving after me for CircuitPython Day. Once again, if you want to support us, Dan and I, and all of us that work for Adafruit, you can go to adafruit.com. Today, you can use the code CPD16. Thank you for putting it on screen. Get a discount, buy some cool stuff. It gets shipped from the new factory in Brooklyn, which is exciting. And yeah, we'll see you on the Discords at adafru.it/discord. Have a great day. Happy CircuitPython Day. I will talk to you later. And thanks a lot, Dan, for chatting with me.
Welcome, and thanks everybody for asking great questions.
Yeah, thanks for the questions.